Welcome to this episode of the Huberman Lab Guest Series. Today, we're going to explore 5 key signs that indicate you are successfully building physical endurance and simultaneously entering a fat loss state. This isn't just about feeling the burn, it's about understanding the physiological, hormonal, and neurological signals that your body provides during the process. So, let's dive into the science-backed signs and what they mean for your training and health trajectory. When we talk about endurance and fat loss, one of the most critical elements to understand is mitochondrial adaptation. Mitochondria are the cellular powerhouses responsible for converting nutrients, carbohydrates, fats, and sometimes proteins into usable energy in the form of ATP. What many people don't realize is that how your mitochondria function, how dense they are in your cells, and how well they respond to physical training are all essential for both improved endurance and efficient fat loss. As we begin to engage in endurance training, particularly low to moderate intensity training in the aerobic zone, we stimulate a biological process called mitochondrial biogenesis. That's the creation of new mitochondria in muscle cells. But more than just increasing the number, training enhances the function of existing mitochondria. This means the mitochondria are better able to take in oxygen and oxidize fatty acids to produce ATP. So what's happening here is not just about burning calories. It's about retraining the body to prioritize fat as a fuel source rather than relying on fast, burning glucose. This adaptation does not happen overnight. It typically takes weeks of consistent training to start to see measurable changes in mitochondrial density. But when it happens, individuals notice they can go longer without feeling fatigued, recover faster, and most importantly, they begin to shift metabolically into a state where fat oxidation is prioritized. This shift is also supported by hormonal changes, such as improved insulin sensitivity, reduced baseline insulin, and better glucagon regulation, all of which enhance the body's ability to mobilize fat stores and convert them into energy. A key component of this mitochondrial improvement process is the activation of certain gene pathways. One of the most well-studied is PGC1 alpha peroxy, some proliferator-activated receptor gamma-coctivator 1 alpha, which acts as a master regulator of mitochondrial development. When you train in the right endurance zones, especially what's known as Zone 2, which is around 60–70% of your maximum heart rate, you stimulate this gene pathway more efficiently. This doesn't just improve mitochondria in skeletal muscle. There's evidence to suggest it can also affect mitochondrial health in the brain and heart. Let's consider the implications of that. If your body becomes better at oxidizing fat, you're able to perform longer bouts of physical activity without tapping into your limited stores of glycogen. This increases stamina. At the same time, because you're consistently using stored fat as fuel, you're also chipping away at fat mass even when you're not working out. This is the power of metabolic flexibility, the ability to seamlessly switch between fuel sources depending on the demands of your environment and activity. Mitochondria are the engine of that flexibility. There are additional benefits worth noting. Improved mitochondrial function also leads to a reduction in oxidative stress. That's because efficient mitochondria produce fewer reactive oxygen species rows, which in turn helps reduce inflammation. For people focused on both fat loss and endurance, inflammation is a huge barrier. Chronic inflammation blunts performance, limits recovery, and disrupts hormones that regulate metabolism and hunger. So, by increasing mitochondrial quality, you're not only improving fat metabolism, you're also creating a cellular environment that's less inflammatory and more resilient to stress. One of the most interesting things about this process is that it scales. Whether you're a beginner just starting a walking routine or a high-performance athlete doing long-duration cycling, the underlying mitochondrial adaptations are the same. The degree and rate of adaptation will vary, but the biology remains consistent. Everyone has the ability to benefit from mitochondrial enhancement provided the training is progressive, consistent, and supported with proper recovery and nutrition. It's also worth mentioning that mitochondrial adaptation is tightly linked to oxygen availability. That's why breath control and nasal breathing techniques during endurance work can actually enhance these adaptations. When you restrict oxygen slightly through nasal breathing, you create a mild hypoxic state that further encourages mitochondrial efficiency and biogenesis. To summarize, mitochondria are not just background players in the fat loss or endurance equation. They are the central mechanism. Enhancing them through structured endurance training is one of the most powerful tools we have to increase fat oxidation, improve metabolic health, and build the kind of physical resilience that endures far beyond a single workout. One of the most powerful, non-invasive biomarkers of cardiovascular adaptation and endurance progress is a lowered resting heart rate. This is not merely a number. It reflects a cascade of physiological changes that occur deep within the heart, nervous system, and muscular systems as a result of consistent endurance training. When a person begins an aerobic exercise routine, whether that's walking, jogging, cycling, or any activity that keeps them in a sustainable, moderate intensity heart rate zone, they begin training the heart to become more efficient. The heart, being a muscle, adapts to repeated load and demand. Over time, with the right intensity and duration of effort, it grows stronger, not in a hypertrophic, dangerous way associated with some anaerobic overload conditions, but in a healthy, efficient manner. This process is called eccentric cardiac hypertrophy, where the left ventricle expands and can hold and pump a larger volume of blood with each beat. The net result is this: fewer heartbeats are required to circulate the same volume of blood through the body. This is where the resting heart rate begins to decline. For most adults, a resting heart rate between 60 to 100 beats per minute is considered average. However, in trained individuals, particularly endurance athletes, it's not uncommon to see resting heart rates between 40 and 60 bpm. In some elite endurance athletes, it can drop even lower. Now, why does this matter for fat loss and endurance? A lower resting heart rate reflects enhanced vagal tone, a stronger activation of the parasympathetic, or rest and digest, branch of the autonomic nervous system. This means the body becomes better at calming itself down, recovering and staying out of chronic states of stress and inflammation. In other words, a lower resting heart rate is not just a measure of fitness, but of resilience and recovery. Additionally, from a metabolic standpoint, the body's efficiency at delivering oxygen during physical activity directly correlates to its ability to use stored fat as fuel. When oxygen delivery improves via more efficient cardiac output, denser capillarization, and higher mitochondrial density, fat oxidation becomes more viable. This means individuals with lower resting heart rates who've built this endurance base are typically burning a higher proportion of fat relative to carbohydrates during steady state efforts. There's also a neurological component. A lower resting heart rate is associated with better heart rate variability, HRV, which is a measure of the beat-to-beat variation in heart rate. High HRV reflects a more adaptable nervous system and correlates with improved cognitive function, better sleep quality, and reduced systemic inflammation, all critical for maintaining energy, balance, adherence to exercise routines, and appetite regulation. A fascinating feedback loop begins to emerge here. As you build cardiovascular endurance, resting heart rate drops. As resting heart rate drops, recovery and fat metabolism improve. As recovery improves, you can train more effectively, and as you train more effectively, the adaptations deepen. It's a cycle of biological optimization that's accessible to nearly everyone, regardless of age or baseline fitness level. It's important to emphasize that you don't need high intensity interval training to achieve this effect. In fact, much of the heart rate lowering impact comes from Zone 2 training, where you're working at 60–70% of your max heart rate. This is a pace where you can still hold a conversation, but you're clearly exerting effort. In this zone, the body prefers fat for fuel, oxygen use is optimized, and the heart is stimulated just enough to trigger beneficial adaptation without unnecessary stress. Monitoring your resting heart rate over time is simple. Wearable devices, chest straps, or even manual morning pulse checks can help you track it. The best time to measure is first thing in the morning, before caffeine, food, or stressors. If you notice your resting heart rate decreasing over the span of several weeks or months, that is a very strong sign that your cardiovascular system is adapting and your endurance is improving. Another critical point, if your resting heart rate begins to increase over a span of days or weeks, it could be a sign of overtraining, inadequate sleep, or poor recovery. That's the value of using heart rate as a two-way mirror. It not only reflects adaptation, but also signals when it's time to back off and recover more intentionally. So, while it's easy to focus on performance outputs like how far you ran or how many calories you burned, resting heart rate offers a deeper, more foundational metric. It's a silent indicator that your body is becoming more efficient, resilient, and capable of handling physical stress. That efficiency is what unlocks greater endurance capacity and promotes sustained fat loss over time. When we think about fat loss and building endurance, there's often an assumption that we need to push our bodies to the edge, high-intensity intervals, extreme calorie deficits, or punishing cardio sessions. But what research consistently shows is that one of the most effective zones for both sustainable fat loss and long-term endurance development is a much more approachable and often overlooked range of effort, Zone 2 training. Zone 2 refers to a specific heart rate range, typically around 60% to 70% of your maximum heart rate. It's a level of exertion where you're breathing heavier than usual, but you can still hold a conversation. You're working, but you're not gasping for air or generating large amounts of lactate. This zone represents what we call aerobic threshold, and it sits at a physiological sweet spot for maximizing fat oxidation and improving mitochondrial function. Why does this matter for fat loss? At lower intensities such as Zone 2, the body is primarily using fat as its fuel source. As intensity increases, the body starts relying more on glucose. So when someone trains in Zone 2 for extended periods, the body adapts by becoming more efficient at mobilizing and burning fat for energy. This adaptation occurs not just during exercise, but at rest as well, meaning your overall metabolic flexibility improves. That's a critical goal if you're looking to lose fat and keep it off sustainably. From a biological standpoint, several important adaptations occur during regular Zone 2 training. First, there's a robust increase in mitochondrial density and efficiency. Mitochondria are the parts of our cells that convert nutrients into usable energy. When we train in Zone 2, we stimulate a key gene pathway, PGC1 alpha, that promotes mitochondrial biogenesis. More mitochondria means more fat-burning capacity. Second, Zone 2 training improves capillarization, the formation of new capillaries that deliver oxygen and nutrients to muscles. This allows for better oxygen delivery, which is essential for aerobic metabolism. The better your body is at delivering and using oxygen, the more efficiently it can tap into fat stores for energy. It also enhances the body's ability to clear metabolic byproducts, particularly lactate. At this intensity, lactate levels remain low, but your body becomes better at utilizing it when it does accumulate. This lactate buffering capacity improves your ability to exercise longer without fatigue, extending your endurance threshold and keeping you in that fat-burning zone for extended sessions. An additional benefit is what's called metabolic crossover shifting. This refers to the point at which the body switches from burning mostly fat to mostly carbohydrates. With consistent Zone 2 training, the crossover point shifts to a higher intensity, meaning you can operate at a higher output while still burning a larger proportion of fat. There are also important nervous system implications. Training in Zone 2 tends to activate the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. This is the rest and digest state, in contrast to the sympathetic fight or flight state activated by high-intensity efforts. By regularly engaging the parasympathetic system through low-intensity aerobic work, you help regulate cortisol levels, reduce systemic inflammation, and improve recovery, factors that directly support fat metabolism and reduce stress-related fat storage. Many people make the mistake of skipping Zone 2 because they believe harder is better. But what happens over time with only high-intensity training is central nervous system fatigue, increased cortisol, impaired recovery, and, ironically, a slowdown in fat loss due to systemic stress. Zone 2, on the other hand, allows for consistent volume, minimal recovery time, and cumulative metabolic adaptations that favor long-term fat loss. Practically speaking, identifying your Zone 2 can be done with a heart rate monitor generally. It's around 180 minus your age. For most people, that means 45 to 60 minutes of brisk walking, cycling, or light jogging, where breathing is deeper but still under control. Some days this may feel too easy, but the physiological impact is far deeper than it appears. It's the kind of training that you can recover from quickly and repeat frequently, making it ideal for creating a high-volume training base. Another key benefit is that it boosts insulin sensitivity. As you train in this zone and increase your muscles' ability to oxidize fat, they also become more receptive to insulin, helping to stabilize blood glucose and reduce fat storage. Over time, this leads to a body that's not just leaner, but metabolically healthier and more resilient. In the long term, Zone 2 creates a foundation upon which all other intensities of training can be built. It enhances your ability to perform in high-intensity sessions, recover faster, and sustain higher workloads, all while promoting a hormonal environment favorable to fat loss. So while it may seem counterintuitive, one of the most effective ways to burn fat is not through extreme output, but through consistent, low to moderate aerobic training that leverages the body's natural preference for fat as fuel, especially when it's conditioned to do so. One of the most accurate indicators that your endurance is improving and that you're successfully adapting to fat-burning exercise is how quickly you recover your breath after exertion. This might sound like a surface-level observation, but underneath that simple signal is a complex and fascinating interplay of systems that include respiratory control, lactate metabolism, carbon dioxide tolerance, and autonomic nervous system regulation. When we exert ourselves, especially during intense or prolonged activity, our muscles begin to produce lactate as a byproduct of glycolysis, the breakdown of glucose for quick energy. Contrary to old fitness myths, lactate is not a waste product. In fact, it's a valuable fuel source that can be shuttled to the heart, brain, and other muscles for use. But when lactate production outpaces the body's ability to clear it, that's when you begin to feel the classic signs of fatigue, burning muscles, shortness of breath, and a sense of being out of gas. Now, with consistent endurance training, particularly aerobic training in the right intensity zones, your body becomes more efficient at clearing lactate. This occurs through multiple adaptations. First, there's an increase in the number and activity of lactate transporters, specifically MCD1 and MCD4, which shuttle lactate from the muscle cells into the bloodstream, where it can be reused elsewhere or buffered. Second, your heart and type I muscle fibers adapt to become more capable of using lactate directly as fuel. These changes result in what's called a rightward shift in the lactate threshold. You can now work harder and longer before lactate begins to accumulate. Practically, this means activities that once left you winded and sore now feel manageable. Your breathing is more controlled. Your recovery between bouts is quicker. Your endurance has increased. But what ties directly into this lactate clearance capacity is your respiratory control specifically, how well your body handles oxygen and carbon dioxide. Most people believe that the urge to breathe during exercise is driven by low oxygen. That's only partially true. The primary driver of breathing, especially under stress, is carbon dioxide CO2 buildup. As CO2 rises, chemoreceptors in the brainstem signal the respiratory muscles to increase breathing rate and depth. However, with breath training and regular endurance work, your brain and body become more tolerant to higher levels of CO2. This means you don't feel the need to breathe as rapidly or as deeply. This is often referred to as CO2 tolerance, and it is directly trainable. When CO2 tolerance increases, so does your ability to remain calm under pressure, delay the onset of breathlessness, and efficiently regulate energy output during exertion. One way to enhance this adaptation is through nasal breathing during aerobic efforts. Nasal breathing naturally restricts airflow, which leads to a buildup of CO2. This mild hypercapnia trains the chemoreceptors in the brainstem to adapt to this new baseline. Over time, you find that your breathing becomes more efficient, your endurance improves, and your body is more comfortable operating in a parasympathetic state even during extended physical stress. There's a neurological benefit here as well. Breathing and emotional state are tightly coupled via the vagus nerve. When your breathing becomes rapid and shallow, your body interprets that as a signal of threat, elevating cortisol and activating the sympathetic nervous system. But when you can control your breath, even under load, you send a signal of safety to the brain. This activates the parasympathetic branch, which aids in recovery, digestion, immune response, and fat metabolism. In short, breath control isn't just a performance tool, it's a fat loss tool. You can measure progress in this domain by observing how quickly your breathing returns to baseline after a bout of exercise. For example, after a 2-minute moderate to hard interval, track how many seconds or breaths it takes for your respiration to return to calm, nasal-only breathing. As endurance improves, that recovery becomes quicker. It's an objective signal that lactate clearance, CO2 tolerance, and autonomic regulation are all improving. Another benefit of improved breath control and lactate management is energy efficiency. Your body learns how to recruit the right fibers at the right time, manage energy substrates more effectively, and avoid unnecessary sympathetic spikes that waste energy and increase fatigue. This adaptation means more work gets done with less perceived effort, what we often describe as improved work economy. So, as you engage in consistent endurance training, one of the best indicators of progress isn't just how far you can go or how fast you can move. It's how well you recover, how well you manage your breath, how long it takes for your system to downshift after exertion. These subtle markers reveal the deep metabolic and neurological changes that underlie sustainable fat loss and endurance. A major misconception about fat loss is that success requires constant hunger or extreme willpower. While some hunger is natural during a calorie deficit, consistent, unregulated appetite spikes or intense cravings often reflect a hormonal system that's out of sync with your energy needs. When physical endurance improves through structured training, particularly aerobic conditioning, the body's hormonal signaling systems begin to stabilize. This leads to what we call appetite modulation, a physiological state where hunger aligns more accurately with actual energy demands, making long-term fat loss more achievable and sustainable. Appetite is governed primarily by 3 key hormones: ghrelin, leptin, and insulin. Ghrelin is known as the hunger hormone. It's secreted by the stomach and signals the brain, particularly the hypothalamus, that it's time to eat. Ghrelin levels naturally rise before meals and fall after eating. However, in individuals with metabolic dysfunction or inconsistent training, ghrelin secretion can become dysregulated, leading to increased hunger even in the presence of adequate energy stores. Leptin is secreted by fat cells and functions as a satiety hormone. It communicates with the brain to reduce appetite and increase energy expenditure. Ironically, in people who are overweight or obese, leptin levels are often high, but the brain stops responding to it effectively, a condition called leptin resistance. This makes the body behave as though it's in a state of deprivation, even when it isn't, driving excessive hunger and reduced motivation to move. Insulin plays a dual role. While it primarily regulates blood glucose, it also influences appetite via its actions in the hypothalamus. Chronically high insulin levels, especially from excessive refined carbohydrate consumption or a sedentary lifestyle, can lead to insulin resistance, which blunts satiety signaling and increases fat storage. Now, here's where endurance training becomes a powerful modulator. Regular aerobic activity improves insulin sensitivity, allowing insulin to do its job more efficiently, reducing blood sugar spikes and helping the brain recognize when you've had enough food. This improves leptin sensitivity over time, restoring the brain's ability to receive accurate satiety signals. As leptin resistance declines, people begin to feel fuller on less food. Simultaneously, endurance training suppresses excessive ghrelin production, helping to reduce random food cravings and stabilize meal timing. The result is a rebalancing of the hunger/satiety axis, one that supports fat loss without the need for excessive dietary restriction. This doesn't mean you won't feel hunger at all, but the hunger becomes predictable and manageable, tied more closely to your actual energy expenditure. In fact, some studies show that individuals who engage in regular Zone 2 training report reduced cravings for hyperpalatable foods such as sugary snacks and processed fats. This effect is likely due to changes in dopaminergic tone in the brain, especially within the mesolimbic reward pathway, which governs motivation and food-seeking behavior. Another piece of the puzzle involves cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. While cortisol is essential in short bursts for alertness and metabolic flexibility, chronic elevation due to stress, overtraining, or poor recovery disrupts all three appetite-regulating hormones. Elevated cortisol increases ghrelin, impairs leptin signaling, and contributes to insulin resistance. One of the most overlooked benefits of aerobic endurance training is its ability to reduce baseline cortisol levels and shift the autonomic nervous system toward parasympathetic dominance, especially when breath-controlled or performed in nature. Sleep also plays a crucial role in appetite regulation. Poor sleep increases ghrelin and decreases leptin, making you hungrier and less satisfied after meals. Endurance training has been shown to improve sleep latency and sleep depth, particularly slow-wave sleep, which further optimizes hormone profiles related to appetite control. So we see a cascade effect. Endurance training improves sleep, sleep improves hormone regulation, and hormone regulation reduces the likelihood of overeating. These adaptations also reflect a shift toward homeostatic eating, eating in response to biological need rather than emotional or environmental cues. With enhanced endurance and hormonal balance, the brain's hypothalamus and brainstem regions, particularly the arcuate nucleus and nucleus tractus solitarius, become better at integrating metabolic signals. This leads to a more accurate representation of what the body needs in real time. It's important to remember that this process is gradual. Hormonal recalibration doesn't happen overnight, but over several weeks of consistent training, especially when paired with nutrient-dense meals and regular sleep, the signals become clearer. You start feeling true hunger rather than stress-induced appetite. You naturally stop eating when full, and the desire for nutrient-poor, high-calorie foods fades. In the context of long-term fat loss and health, this is a game changer. Rather than fighting against your physiology with willpower alone, you're aligning your training to support your body's innate regulatory systems. Appetite becomes less of a battle and more of a guidepost, an accurate signal instead of a sabotaging force. That's the hallmark of true metabolic balance, and one of the most valuable outcomes of smart endurance training. When discussing fat loss, people often focus exclusively on calories burned during formal exercise, workouts, runs, heat sessions, and so on. But one of the most underappreciated, yet biologically significant contributors to fat burning is something called non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT. NEAT refers to all the energy expended for everything we do that is not sleeping, eating, or structured exercise. This includes walking to the bathroom, fidgeting, standing, pacing while on the phone, carrying groceries, even blinking. It's all movement, and it all adds up. What's particularly interesting is how NEAT begins to increase spontaneously as your endurance and fitness levels improve. This isn't necessarily a conscious decision. People who engage in regular aerobic training begin to feel more motivated to move throughout the day. They don't just train and collapse. Instead, they find themselves walking more, taking stairs instead of elevators, and generally feeling an urge to move. This is not just anecdotal, it's physiological. Endurance training leads to shifts in brain chemistry and hormone signaling that make the body more active even outside of deliberate workouts. One of the key systems involved in this is the dopaminergic reward system, specifically in areas like the nucleus accumbens and the ventral tegmental area. These areas are involved in motivation, movement initiation, and goal-directed behavior. When someone exercises regularly, particularly at moderate intensities like Zone 2, dopamine receptor sensitivity increases. As a result, movement begins to feel more rewarding, creating a positive feedback loop where activity begets more activity. Another factor driving increased NEAT is improved mitochondrial efficiency. As endurance training enhances the number and function of mitochondria, the body becomes better at producing energy. But the brain doesn't simply store that energy. It looks for ways to use it. The result is a subtle shift in behavior. People begin to feel more energetic, more restless when sedentary, and more drawn toward physical tasks. This state, sometimes referred to as low-level hyperactivity, is actually a sign of improved metabolic health. NEAT can vary widely between individuals. Research shows that in some cases, NEAT can account for an additional 300 to 800 calories burned per day, without a single workout being logged. This is especially relevant for fat loss, as consistent energy output throughout the day leads to a more favorable energy balance, even when caloric intake remains stable. When someone improves their endurance and starts walking more, standing longer, or taking short walks between tasks, they are significantly increasing their daily caloric expenditure without even thinking about it. There's also a psychological component here that's tied to the prefrontal cortex, the brain's center for planning, decision making, and impulse control. When people engage in regular physical activity, especially rhythmic aerobic training, activity in the prefrontal cortex becomes more stable and organized. This improves executive function, meaning people are more likely to follow through on goals, stick to routines, and make better choices throughout the day. As a result, they tend to avoid sedentary behavior and seek out physical engagement in daily life. From a nervous system perspective, regular endurance training helps balance the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems, which in turn supports consistent, low-stress movement throughout the day. You're less likely to crash after a workout and more likely to maintain stable energy. This contributes to both the desire and capacity to stay active beyond the gym. It's important to point out that NEAT isn't about doing more intense work. It's about consistent, low-grade movement. For example, someone who walks an additional 0 steps per day due to increased energy and mood can end up burning an additional 150 calories per day. Multiply that over the course of a month, and it becomes a significant contribution to fat loss without any change to formal workouts. Another overlooked aspect of NEAT is that it's closely tied to environmental design and lifestyle awareness. When people begin training consistently, they also tend to structure their environments in ways that promote more movement. They might park farther away, take stretch breaks, or use standing desks. This behavioral shift is often unconscious, but it is a powerful side effect of improved endurance and energy regulation. Ultimately, as endurance improves, NEAT increases not because you force yourself to move, but because movement becomes neurologically and metabolically rewarding. This is the body's way of maintaining energy balance and keeping systems engaged. It's a natural extension of the internal state of vitality that comes from efficient energy production, stable blood sugar, enhanced oxygen delivery, and improved mood regulation. What's profound about this mechanism is its sustainability. NEAT-based fat loss doesn't rely on motivation or discipline. It relies on biological momentum. When your physiology shifts toward movement, fat loss becomes more of a side effect than a forced outcome. That's when fat loss becomes not just effective, but effortless.